I don't have any hot gossip on downtown activities. Don, you got anything pressing?
Oh, nothing that we haven't read in the Ann Arbor News. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of meetings of the DDA, but it was stuff like fencing on the, important stuff, but nothing that's on our agenda. So what is on our agenda is Steve Palms has gathered together some of his friends and colleagues, maybe not friends and colleagues.
Yes.
And I'm going to turn it over to Steve, let him make introductions and stuff.
It's just great.
Well, thank you. As everyone knows, lots of our meetings involve discussions about real estate in one fashion or another. What's going on, what does the future hold? What's going to go here, what's going to go there, and so. Peter and Don and I were talking one day, and I said, I know a few real estate guys, and maybe I could persuade them to spend a few minutes with us and talk about what they're up to and, what their visions are for the future, what they think is going on, what, sort of let us know, peek into a looking glass down the road to see, what might be coming and, what impact. One of the things that I've noticed is it seems like every time I see a list of cities, the top 10 best cities to live in the U.S., it seems like Ann Arbor often makes those lists. I don't know if that has an impact on the real estate development, whether those people come and hunt you out and say, build a place for me. But it certainly gets high marks for livability. And how do you continue that? How do you expand that? In any event, where is the city today? Where is it going? And frankly, on the other side, are there things that, we're an advisory council to the city. Are there things that we could do together to improve your opportunities? Because you're the ones that actually make these buildings happen. So, what can we do to make that a smoother path and, to enable that process to move along so that it doesn't create a further impediment for you. There are plenty of impediments. I'm a real estate lawyer, and I've represented plenty of developers, and there are plenty of rocks in the road that you've got to manage. And if somehow we can make that process with the city, not that the city obviously they have a real interest in what happens, but to make that process smoother and more straightforward. Again, suggest maybe I'd like to do two things. One is have people in on the committee introduce themselves, but then also actually why don't we go with that? Peter, you want to start? Obviously, Peter Honeyman.
Are we doing introductions?
Yeah. Introductions, yes. So
Peter Honeyman,
that our guests know who we are.
I'm a downtown resident for the past 20 years. I live on the 100 block of South 4th Avenue, in between the Embassy Hotel and the Haymaker. Very classy.
Exclusive.
And I am an actual member appointed to the CAC.
Go ahead.
I'm Tom Stolberg. I don't live downtown. I'm here because it's going to be a great conversation to listen to.
I'm Chris Crockett, and Jeff and I have lived on Kingsley Street across from St. Thomas Church since 1980, so 43 years.
Yeah, I'm Jeff. I'm thrilled with this conversation. There are so many questions and so many things we need to learn from the developer's perspective, so I'm very excited about this meeting.
I'm Carolyn Arcure. I live with my husband Joseph at 111 West Liberty, up above Hyperion Coffee. We bought that building in '76, the building across the alley, which we've since sold in 1975. And we're really the first people to come back and live downtown as residents. You'll remember what it was like in '75. There's some eye rolls over there.
Joe Arcure. I live with Carol. She explained it. From 1975 on, we lived there. So.
I'm Grace Singleton, president of the Carytown District Association, also partner at Zingerman's Deli for 20 years.
And I'm a happy resident of downtown. We moved to downtown, 8 years ago? Something like that, and at Sloan Plaza. And best decision Betty and I ever made to, actually get right downtown. So we very much enjoy living downtown. And I know these guys in various capacities.
You didn't
and,
say your
thank you.
name.
Oh, Steve Palms.
Julie Ritter, I've lived on Catherine Street since 1973. Been active in lots of different civic things, worked for Ron Weiser for 11 years, so I have an interest.
That's a long time.
Yeah, that's a long time.
And wiser year.
Yeah.
Born for 12.
I'm Steve Kaplan. I was born in Ann Arbor, lived here all my life. I live in downtown, and I've worked and lived near downtown all my life.
Eileen Tyler, and I went to school here in the 60s.
There you go.
And came back in 1983. We lived on the old west side for 19 years, and we've lived downtown, just two houses outside, or 3 houses outside of the DDA, so we're on North Division for 21 years, so.
And Ron, yeah, go ahead. I worked with Ron on his Morningside, with Morningside, on their development in the Lower Town, which has gone very well. But of course, we had a few bumps in the road getting there, but ultimately got there, and it's looking terrific.
Thank you. So I'm Ron Mucha. I'm a principal with Morningside Group. We're a mixed-use developer based in Chicago. I lead our Southeast Michigan office. I've been working in the city for 20 years now. Called Ann Arbor my home for 15 years. One of the best decisions my family ever made was coming out here. We just absolutely love it here.
I'm Jim Chaconis. I run the Colliers Real Estate. Worked with Steve at McKinley. I was there for 12 years.
And you see your name all over town. Right. You can't walk down the street without seeing it 6 times. And Bill, you kindly agreed to join us. I've not worked with you, but both Jim Chaconis and Bill Milliken said, here's a guy that if you're going to talk about real estate with a group of Ann Arbor folks, Bill is a guy. Bill is a guy you have to get to come and join us. So
Thank you. Design Review Board.
So
There you go.
everybody's giving a little background. I came here in '64 for graduate school and just never left. So for many years, it wasn't when I was trained in, I had a construction company called Phoenix Contractors. We did the Zingerman's Megalopolis and a number of other buildings downtown, all commercial. We remodeled the Bruce Chris, the Chop House, the Knights, many other commercial buildings here.
I leased some he-built.
I own 2 buildings that I redeveloped. I've always had I sold the construction company a few years ago. I always had another side of redeveloping or buying property around the county. And I have one that I have my office in on North First. Everybody now knows it as Bird Building. Mural of the birds on the side. So we have a lot of fun with that. That was true junk building when I bought it in 1990, and we turned it around pretty nicely. So my office is in the back part of that. But I'm also a member of the Downtown Review Board. I think that's the connection. That's my connection to that, the other half, yeah.
I'm Steve Palm's neighbor, which is how I got lassoed into being with you this evening. And I look out my window at Chris and Jeff from Sloan Plaza, down in the neighborhood. I do commercial brokerage in town. Milliken Realty Company is my operating name. And I'm a trustee at Washtenaw Community College.
I'm Don Duquette. I've lived in Ann Arbor since I came here for law school in '72. Went away for a short time, but been here almost ever since. 11 years ago, my wife and I moved from the western part, West Ann Arbor, 1.25 miles to Sloan Plaza. We've been living downtown now for 11 years, and like Steve, it's been a great move. We love the buzz of downtown. And I got recruited by Ray Detter just to come to this advisory committee. It's a good way to see what's going on, and I care a lot about what's happening to the city. When Ray was unable to continue through infirmity and age, Steve and I, or Peter and I, stepped up to be, we're effectively serving as co-chairs of the committee, and happy to do it. I'm delighted you guys are here.
At first it was Steve Kaplan, I want to mention.
I'm Serena Brunner, and my husband Paul and I have lived at 318 West Liberty since its inception, which is 7 years ago. And we love living downtown, with all its pros and cons. And we could say we're just a little anxious about the development at 415 Washington. Oh, we're not talking about that.
I have only one regret. We wanted the builder to change the name of the condo from the Mark to the car wash, so when people asked where we lived, we could say we lived in the car wash. He was unwilling to do that.
Remember that, I've been there for quite a while. We have done it.
And people on Zoom.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Okay.
Oh,
yes.
So let me call them out. Let's see, there's Henry Nelson. Okay, there's Eleanor.
Yeah, I'm Eleanor. I live on Forest Court, which is about 2 buildings away from the DDA, on the South University end of campus and down. And I'm very concerned about the developments that are just mushrooming up, or at least the proposals for them are mushrooming up along Forest Avenue and Church Street.
Angela?
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Peet. I work in the tech space here in Ann Arbor. I've lived here for about 8 years. Been owning a condo right above Warby Parker. I'm neighbors with Carolyn and Joe, basically, for the last, I think, 5 years now. And I'm one of the official members. I'm not quite sure, as we were going around, whom were the visitors and who were the official members of the committee, but I was able to get voted in. So for whatever that's worth, thank you very much.
Alan?
Yes, I'm Alan Haber. I'm an advocate for the Commons, working at the center of the city downtown space. I live on 3rd Street. I moved to Ann Arbor in 1936, so I did spend a few years away in the Bay Area. I have a taste of People's Park. I'm eager for the center of the city to be a cone of bright light illuminating the whole town.
Thanks, Alan. Kitty?
Hi, I live in Ward over on Cross Street, and I've owned my house since 1971 over here. Bought it for $9,000 when it was the other side of the tracks. Boy, things changed. But I'm just very interested in what's going on here.
Thanks, Kitty. Maura, why don't you also take a minute to, I didn't see you earlier, why don't you also take a minute to tell us what's new?
Yeah, hi everybody, Maura Thompson. I'm the communications manager at the DDA, currently interim executive director. And I actually have quite a few updates, but it does seem like you have a very full agenda. So I think I'll abbreviate what I was going to report out on. Does that sound okay, Peter?
Yeah.
Yep. So just a few quick things. You may all have been aware of some conversations that have been happening around our parking structures and fencing. One of the things, in addition to exploring fencing on the below rooftop levels and making changes to our rooftop levels, we have also been working with community mental health. And we have all new signage that has been installed on all of the rooftops. In addition, we are working right now to install additional signage, which is going to be different than the rooftop, on in our display boxes and in our elevators. So I just want to put it out there to the public. Anybody who knows somebody who is in crisis or in crisis, there is a number to call. 24/7 988 is available to dial or text. So I just feel it's important to put that out there as much as we possibly can. The city is currently undergoing, as you probably are all aware, of the budget. They're going through their budget process right now. This DDA is part of that budget process, and our budget presentation and video is available online on the city's website. So if anybody has interest in that, please take a look. We are currently underway with a parking rate study that we just started. Parking rates have not been looked at since about 2017, when we implemented a 5-year strategy that began in 2018. The final increase in that strategy took place last July of 2022. And it's important to note that that strategy only included on-street parking and permits, so that our hourly parking rates in our parking structures have remained the same since 2012. So they remain at $1.20 an hour. So we're taking a comprehensive look at all of our parking rates. And given the impact that the pandemic had on the parking system, and if you watch our budget presentation, you will see that impact. It's going to be some challenging times ahead for the parking system, and those parking rates are going to have to be adjusted so that we have a system that is financially stable and that we are able to maintain these really important city assets. Just as a point of interest, the revenue loss over the 3 years from 20 to 22 was about $33 million. And how we were able to manage that system through that time was by deferring expenses. And the key word there is deferring. And those expenses, didn't go away. They're just repairs and maintenance that weren't as critical as other items, so that we, have a lot of catching up to do in the parking system. Oh, I see a hand raised. I can take a question.
Yeah, I mean, I was asking about what the signage is about. So on the parking structures, so has there been an increased rate of suicide on our parking structures? Is that what should be inferring from what you're sharing?
Well, so city council, I believe it was back in October, after there was an incident at a parking structure, a suicide at a parking structure, had made a request to encourage the DDA to do more than what was currently happening. And the fencing on the parking structures, that began in 2017. We started fencing all of our rooftops. After that time, we started investing in below rooftops. So our fencing has actually just become part of our annual maintenance and restoration. So we have continued on those efforts. And then I believe it was perhaps in January, there was it was December, another incident. So we reached out to community mental health and said, is there anything more we can be doing on the messaging front? Help us. So we've been working with them since that time. And it's actually counting millage dollars. They have a collaboration with Chart, which is out of U of M, that develops the signage. DDA is paying for all of the signage, but the messaging we leave to that organization. So we've got signage that they developed on the rooftops, and they wanted to do something different on below the rooftop levels. And we're also working with the downtown business community to distribute magnets, posters, and postcards. So we're just trying to get this information out there as much as we possibly can.
Thank you.
And then just a couple of other quick updates. The State Street project is underway. This is phase 2, and we're working from just north of North University to Huron. These next few weeks is heavily focused on some stormwater work. Also, some concrete work should be starting next week. That project is currently on schedule and is scheduled to be completed by around Labor Day, with, of course, a stop during Art Fair. But so far, so good on that front. We're also underway with a curbside management study. and we are working with a consultant team to better manage our curbside space, which over the years, the changing demand on our curbside, particularly during the pandemic, we've seen many different uses. So we are working with a team that is going to help us come up with a toolkit that will be able to evolve with the changing demand that we see at the curbside. One of the key pieces that we found, and that many of you are probably aware of, enforcement is really an important component of curbside management, and the DDA does not manage enforcement. So there'll be, I'm sure, conversations to be had on that front. And then the final thing I'll mention is DDA staff have been working on a COVID impact and recovery report for our downtown. And we just recently completed that work, and it's available on the DDA's website under About Downtown. There are some drop-down tabs for reports and studies. So I would encourage anyone who has interest to take a look at that report. We'll actually be presenting it tomorrow at the DDA board meeting. I could go on, but I know you have other things that you want to get to. So I'll take questions, and if anybody has any.
Other questions?
I just like her to come to our next meeting. Fill us in on the rest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Maura.
Thanks a lot, Maura.
Sure.
Henry Nelson, I didn't get a chance to hear from you. And I guess I won't. Okay.
Okay. We'd like to chat about, the major areas, retail, office, residential, what's the other one? Commercial, and the forecasts or what's going on today and what are the opportunities. But one thing that seems clear is that in Jim, I see your name and the signs all over the retail stores, and it seems like people are moving out, and I don't know how well that's leasing up again. I know COVID had a big impact on various operations, but and I also look at redoing State Street and Main Street, and hopefully redoing that and redesigning the curves might help traffic flow to retail owners, operators, and restaurants and whatnot. But what do you see about the interest in the retail operations in Ann Arbor, in the city?
Well, the plus side is, you take a look at, we put Target in the State Theater.
Yeah.
And they're running about 20% over projection. So it was a great hit. And the mayor helped a lot, because I couldn't get power, and he stepped in and helped me get power for it. The Mongolian space, we've got a great restaurant going in there, very well funded, 7,300 square feet.
Can you say what it is, Jim?
What's that?
What kind of restaurant?
I think it's gonna be, it's said 3 wood burning ovens, so maybe like Italian or whatever.
Oh, okay.
But this is, it was really nice to get that one. And they're putting eventually a tavern in the lower level. The downside is, as we lost office space downtown, there's no lunch business. There's weekend business for restaurants, so they're trying to survive on weekends and not lunch. So having residential put in there is really kind of cool. But you take a residential unit, and it's 1/10 of the people that would have been in our office building. So 3,000 square foot space, we have 15 people in there instead of 2. So that's affected the lunch, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday dinners. So, the residential is kind of cool, and then we did a little study, and a whole bunch of people live here in the summer. There's a lot of snowbirds that have the condos in the summer. So I don't know if you saw that in Sloan or whatever, but yeah, that was the last residential deal I did. I sold the Sloan Plaza. Never again.
Oh, 1986, huh?
Yes. So I think the city, they're focusing on residential, but they ought to start thinking about trying to bring some office back downtown.
Because then that would help the restaurants and the retail.
Take a look at the DT building, that's going to be all apartments.
Yeah.
Instead of office, which was a huge hit for downtown.
Jim, do you get much inquiry about office space? And what do you think the city can do?
The one issue we had, when you add in the parking, it adds on a larger space, it adds $8 to $9 a square foot on top of the rental rate when they have the factory parking. So it's not $28 a square foot, it's $35 or $36 a foot. Before, now there's plenty of parking. Before, there was always a lack of parking. So a lot of people moved out of downtown and moved, south. We moved quite a few people down there. We moved about 80,000 square feet in the last year and a half. So
Office out of downtown.
Out of downtown. So downtown's cool. I moved my office out of downtown. That was more McKinley's fault. They took 35 parking spaces out. We had 3. And I go, oh, parking spaces.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah. So, I think that the city, I know they focus on livability in downtown, but if they want these restaurants and retail to survive, they've got to look at that. The other issue we have is on new construction. My taxes alone are $13 to $15 a square foot. So my triple nets are $17 to $18. So you've got your construction costs, which aren't right, and then you put that on top. So people are paying, $70, $75 a square foot. A retail restaurant can live on 7% of the gross. That's it. They get over 7%, they're working for the landlord. So you get those kind of rents. The only one that will do it is more of a national. So what we're doing is we're pushing out the local restaurants, which are really cool.
Yeah.
And we're ending up with all nationals. So we're on Southview, we got, Raising Cane's Chicken, Daddy, everything there it's got a national flair to it, which is sad.
Is there a way to change that cost structure so that it appeals to
taxes? 90% of it's taxes. So you tax these things. A good example is the big, Ron.
Yeah.
It's $29,000 per door for the apartments in there. Is taxes. That's per door. It's a lot of dollars. So you have to get $2,000, $2,300 a bed to make any money. So, Southview.
How important, because you mentioned parking as a factor in office, but and the DDA has been involved in building parking structures for quite a long time. But there's been also a discussion about removing parking spaces in construction. What is your opinion on availability of parking downtown in regards to
Before the pandemic, we didn't have enough. Now, because a lot of companies have left, I think there's an excess of parking. But it's just not the amount, it's Barracuda moved out of downtown. We moved them out to Oak Valley. That was 40,000 square feet. So you look at some stuff there, we're getting calls on, okay, where can we save some money? It isn't so much the downsizing, it's the cost. Everybody talks about offices downsizing. A lot of the companies are bringing employees back, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
They're finding out that they need to talk to each other and work together. So we're seeing a lot of that.
But they're not coming back to downtown. They're
the costs. Everybody's worried about
our
costs.
parking is cheaper and the taxes are
So there's
lower.
no parking. Taxes are cheaper.
Yeah.
And
Tyler Kinley, who's the DDA board chair, mentioned an interesting phenomenon at the last Economic Development and Affordable Housing Committee meeting, that millennials and Xers don't want to come back. They want nothing of it. Whereas the Zoomers, Gen Z, they can't stand the idea of working at home. So there's this sort of.
Well, if you have 3 kids at home, you kind of want to go to work.
Yeah. But if you've been in remote classes for the last 4 years, then you definitely don't want to be home.
Yeah, we're seeing the companies, the productivity is what they're talking to me about. It's just not there. I think your accountant or somebody runs numbers, it doesn't make any difference. But the tech business, the sales and stuff, you need to talk to people.
Yeah.
It's like my son is going to be a teacher, but he's substitute teaching in the schools, and the kids can't interact with people. That COVID got to the point where, that they're hiding behind the mask. they're way behind.
Well, and even my experience putting a real estate deal together, you know, if you've got people on the phone, that's one thing, but gathering people in a room, especially if you've got an issue to try to resolve, will often work much better than just getting on a conference phone or a Zoom call or whatever. So I agree with you that in the short run, people got sick of their commute, decided that they're gonna save half an hour, whatever it is every day, and just work from home. And, but I think that the lack of that human interaction, in-person interaction, is gonna drive people back to the office. So I think that will happen,
But we need to get them back downtown.
Yeah.
Or the restaurants, the retail is not gonna survive.
Why would a business want to move its offices downtown compared to going to the burbs where it might be?
There's no restaurants, there's no coffee shops. It's, any place you have to go, you have to drive. Yeah. You
And
can't.
that's another question I have, is that I have two kids in tech industry, but in California, and they're seeing that a lot of the younger colleagues of theirs are not driving. They don't want to drive, they don't want to have a car, they'll use Uber. One of my sons works for Uber, and they will do anything to avoid driving, whether it's working remotely and using driving services, or the companies provide that, or they work in a downtown centralized location like downtown would be, but they aren't necessarily bringing their cars with them.
We saw that the DDA years ago did that bus pass, it was like $15 a year. It was great. We used it a lot with Barracuda. So you didn't have to have your car, you could take your bus downtown. It was really kind of terrific. We're seeing that. I was talking to people that do the driver training, there's some tenants of mine. And they said, it's funny, it used to be somebody 15 years old, wanted to get that license. Now they're 18, 19 years old, they have to get a license. And I go,
So you think better public transportation would help?
It's not bad. I mean, the public transportation, I have to give them credit, they do a great job. And that, you could pay that cost, I don't know if it's still going or not, but, you know, it's just great, because people can jump on that bus, $15 a year, I think?
Yeah.
So that really helped when we did Barracuda, we did Pillar, we did Lamasoft, you know, that worked well. We also saw some of the kids that didn't want a car, and they were moving into some of these student high-rising, because they don't have a car, they don't have to pay for it, so they'll pay extra for the rent, which, because they can walk.
Right.
It's like you walk all the time.
And, you know, there's that concept of a 15-minute city that I've read about where, you know, the goal is to have everything that you need on a daily basis within 15 minutes of where you live.
That's why Target did so well.
Yeah.
It's got grocery. We had a lot of pushback on doing that.
But
A lot of
15
people said
minutes
it's
is either
horrible, and I
walking
go,
or public
grocery store
transportation.
downtown.
But
I would think it wouldn't be too good for CVS, because they're right next door.
Well, I have the Target building, so I don't care.
I know.
I don't-
I get my prescriptions at CVS. Yeah, I know.
There's that.
Just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah, no, we
But
go to both.
walkability is a big thing, and people, for those of us who like being able to walk, and we can, so we do, but we're also seeing it in the younger generation, they don't wanna bring the car in, so it's not as much a
But
factor.
then that raises the question about residential downtown, in addition to say just dorms. You know, Ron, you've got a wonderful residential development. My guess is it's filled with kids that go to, or that are working at the hospital, or residents that are at the hospital.
Kids.
That's my guess, and then they obviously can walk to the hospital.
Sure, so our project that Steve is referring to, you know, the Beekman project, over at Plymouth and Maiden Lane. And it sits, if you know it, it sits right at the confluence of the medical campus and the Norton campus. So like pretty much all of the new construction buildings that have gone up since, if you remember, in fact, there's a very good article in the Observer this month. Really gives a good timeline of accurately of what happened. And you know, starting with the downturn in 08, the only thing that could get financed was student housing, not to mention there was an incredible demand because none of these universities were building any housing. So that started the proliferation of those buildings and on South U, and then it migrated into the core of downtown for better or for worse, because a lot of the sites, you think about the Foundry or the Standard or those kind of sites, you might not expect those to be student buildings per se, but they are.
Oh, yeah, they are.
And certainly the early ones were student because that's all that was getting built. Now it's different because there's just such tremendous demand created by the university expanding its enrollment.
What's the percentage of them that really bring a car, or are you surprised by maybe some of them not bringing cars? Do you have any way of evaluating that?
Well, I would say so in terms of, I can speak to our project. We have a unique situation. It's a laboratory in a sense because it's a multi-phase project. So we did size our parking initially at 0.9 spaces per unit. We had to get a slight variance to do that. And no one really knew. We figured that was conservative. And as it turned out, we developed the first building, and we found through that building and the lease up now of our second building, the real rate in that particular location, I want to be clear, this is not like a, one size fits all downtown, but in that location, we're about 0.6. That's about the right rate, and that'll aid us in terms of the next phase of the development. But
that's what
But you can
So
either
to your
walk or take
point-
a bus downtown.
right, because you can easily, well, not just downtown, but in our case, to the hospital
Sure, yeah,
or
yeah.
to the north.
Do some people
campus.
use the university structures across the street?
Our tenants don't, no. They park in our deck. So that deck it's underutilized right now. Timing wasn't great in terms of when it was
The
finishing. up.
university charges everybody for parking, all employees.
Right.
Yeah,
So it's not free.
Used to work there.
But you're overparked then, because the projection was that you need more than you actually are.
Yes,
actually
we
do
found
need.
out that we have a surplus of parking, and it turns out with the steps we're gonna take for the final phase of the project, that we can utilize that surplus of parking and use it efficiently. So again, it's a multi-phase project. It's not
Sure.
common that you have that. Frequently, when you look across, whether it's Ann Arbor or especially other projects in other cities, I mean, there were massive parking requirements. You have parking decks that are
Right.
sitting largely unutilized. I mean, there's spaces no one ever parks in. That's how many extra spaces were constructed.
You take a look at the Vic one, there's no parking, and they've got a waiting list to get, with zero parking.
But the downtown parking though is short
That's,
supply.
it's office.
Yeah.
That's a whole different story.
But we were talking about the kind of tenants, so at our project, Beekman, we have what I would call a U of M, largely a U of M tenant base. But that's distinct from saying it's student housing. So student housing, you would think it's undergraduates.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what it typically is. Jim's saying 29,000 a unit, that's because there's 4 or 5 bedrooms, bathrooms in those units.
Yeah.
Our units, we design them differently. They're small units, but they're studios or they're 1 bedrooms largely.
That's more for residents or for.
Yeah, so we have a lot of graduate students and we have a lot of people who make a living at the hospital.
Yeah, that's it.
All the way up and down that food chain. Downtown, it's largely undergraduates in these buildings. I
Yeah.
know most of them come in as thinly veiled, market rate, non-U of M housing, but they're full of U of M students for a reason, because that's where the demand is, and
Yeah.
because there's so much demand, they can pay the significant rents. And to Jim's point, if you get to the question, the most significant impediment to developing anything, it is property taxes, like first and foremost, number one. It hurts all manner of new developments.
And they're only gonna go up.
Well,
Well, but then there's a
That'll
catch
eliminate the
22 there,
retail.
because if the university continues to expand and build its own buildings, of course, then all that goes off the tax rolls.
They're building 8,300 beds, and they're gonna take down 1,300 beds. They're gonna take down Mary Markley. They're gonna build 2,000 beds on North Campus, Mary Housing. And then the Fingerly, Bell Field will be 6,300 beds.
But a data point that runs through my head all the time is that other people have heard this before. 7 years ago, university had 41,000 students. Now, 7 years later, 51,000 students.
And there'll be 61 in 10 years.
And that's in the context of 13 of Michigan's universities losing students. What Central Michigan having to close residence halls for lack of. So that's a big footprint that affects us.
Let me let Angela ask a question. She's had her hand raised.
Thank you. Very patiently waiting my turn here. So I just want to point out that it's been really interesting. People have talked a lot about the inflation rate and what's caused that. And one of the things that has happened that people, that companies don't always want to point out is that they've raised their rates. Like if you look at the prices for eggs and what's gone on there. So if we overlay some of that thinking onto our setting within the downtown, my biggest question is, yes, prices have gone up. Yes, we're missing certain things, but what kind of a percentage are the owners of these buildings trying to get? Before the pandemic, Vogel's was sold. I don't know if anybody remembers this, and Logan was trying to get that space and expand into it. I was talking to one of the owners and like right around when this happened, and he said he was shocked because the person who bought it basically doubled or tripled the rent that that they had in their current building. So they were pricing out local small businesses well before COVID happened. So thinking about when we say, oh, only nationals can come in, some of that, with all due respect, is in part the rates that the owners think that they have to set in order to get. So I just want to will say that was happening before the pandemic, and you have lots of data. It's a delight to have you here and have you speak to your experience, but I also want to throw in some other angles on the tech market. So there's been a lot of other people who have looked at the push to coming back into work as an opportunity to get rid of people. There have been a lot of layoffs, and they're trying to push some folk. There have been companies that are doing things like trying to get rid of folks so that they don't have to fire them. And on top of that, I know that being able to work remotely for at least already established tech teams for very young workers or brand new workers, I totally disagree. And I think that they need to be in person. But for established tech workers, being able to be remote and that trend continuing, I don't see that changing, in part because they just like it too much. And people saying that they're not efficient or they're worrying about efficiency. Efficiency can be gained from lots of different areas, and telling people that they have to come in and that's the way to change it, to me, is an indication that an organization hasn't put in the right processes or services or hasn't figured out how to support remote work. So saying that just because you're going to push people to move from remote is going to create efficiency is kind of a poor business perspective. And there are definitely lots of other ways. So again, your data is probably somewhat newer and more vast than mine, but I also wanted to point out that there are certainly counterpoints to some of those comments. And when people throw them out there, they don't always understand in larger groups like this that there are other perspectives. So I felt like I wanted to share those. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
The one on Logan, what happened there was the Logan building and the one next door sold. And as soon as it sold for a premium, it came uncapped. So I put Logan's in there, so I know it pretty well. So it wasn't that the landlord got greedy. The landlord, he was older, that was his retirement, he sold it for, you know, people say we sell things for too much. We've owned it for 50 years, you want to get as much as possible.
Right, yeah, that's your.
So then all of a sudden, when it sold for, you know, $400 a foot. The city taxes went up to like 600%.
Yeah.
So that's what happened to Logan. Logan's was my favorite restaurant.
Yeah.
But we went.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a greedy landlord. It was a guy, that was his retirement. He sold the building. And
Well, for whatever it's worth, that's not what he was sharing.
well, I sold the building, so I know the building.
Yeah.
And who bought it was the people in the Earl building.
Yeah.
And they own the other ones. So.
Steve's running.
But,
Did you have a question?
well, I have a question.
Go ahead. Oh, yes. So we attended, you're all aware that at the site of the Michigan Credit Union, Core Spaces has plans to build, I think it's a 15-story.
16-story,
Yeah. And Chris and I attended.
17-story here.
Well,
it may be. It's
whatever. So we attended the presentation, and we were a little concerned that if the only consideration for downtown construction is for student housing, we have a concern that, well, in the summer, students go away. So you end up with a lot of vacancies there, and that sort of is problematic for developing a sense of community downtown. So we asked, and I can't remember the name of the local guy.
Who's the guy?
Luke Bonner, that's right.
Luke
Yeah,
Bonner,
okay.
that's
Luke
it.
Bonner. I said, why not build condos? We would much prefer to have long-term residents stay in a site like that. He said, because building rental developments is more profitable than building condominiums, because it's harder to sell. And I appreciate your perspective on that, because that's something, and I think when I talked to you about that, you had mentioned the same thing, because you had the choice of condos, but you decided to do apartments.
Right.
Could you discuss that?
Sure,
dilemma?
I could speak to it. I was just thinking about, 20 years ago, downtown Ann Arbor was amidst a condo wave. It was all condo fever. That's all that was getting developed anywhere. It was the same size unit, same amenities, same location, same price point. And they were all big, like the dinosaurs when they were roaming. We were fortunate with Liberty Lofts that we were A, early in that cycle, and B, we had a unique product. So we were lucky, we were fortunate. But if you look at the other buildings of that time, Freed's building didn't do well. Mike Kincannon, rest his soul, had a number of sites teed up for all large format condo buildings. I mean, regardless of the downturn that ensued, that was never gonna last too long. Well, when the downturn happened, the dinosaurs went away and then the mammals had a chance to come out. And so, and it's been really great to see for diversity for downtown Ann Arbor housing, the condo buildings that have come back, and there are a lot of them, they're just a lot smaller and more manageable. And when you develop condos, you have pre-sale risk, and it's difficult to do large format condo buildings. Believe me, we tried with the first phase of our Beekman project. It didn't go so well. We thought we could replicate what we did before, and we were wrong. So, but what's happened is there have been a number of these, anywhere from 5 to 20 unit buildings that have popped up. Alex Perry does a number of them. Tom Fitzsimmons does a number of them. They're very good at it. So the problem, Jeff, is in terms of profitability, if you take the envelope, think of an envelope of a core building that's 15 stories and how many square feet you can develop, you just can't develop a condo building of that same magnitude. The economics won't support it. Demographics of Ann Arbor, the demand for condos isn't strong enough to support the cost and to fill that many units in a condo building. Whereas with rentals, there's very strong demand. So that's why you're not going to see large format condo buildings. You will continue to see a lot of condos. They'll be like the Mark, or they'll be like any number of other projects that are smaller. But you're not going to see, to make the equivalent, but that core project could be 100 condos or 150 condos, or I'd have to see the exact, it's something like that. And you're just not going to see those large format buildings, here in Ann Arbor.
If I could just follow quickly, then I'll shut up. So the problem that presents though is that if it's rental, the problem with rental is that young people going to the market are never going to get equity. And so if they're spending increased amounts on rent, are they going to be able to save in order to actually buy and get ownership of some of these developments? It seems like it's a problem. Maybe
It's not gonna happen. It's like my daughter. I had to give her the down payment. There was no way that she could sit there and come up with $100,000, young couple, with their costs. So that was the one gift for your kids, but that's where I talked to the bankers, most of the down payments for these young couples are coming from parents.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say something to what you're bringing up, and that is the problem that you're describing when you talk about in the summertime is a different place, is actually the answer to your question at the same time. 55% of this downtown residential market is transient. They're not just transient because they're students, they're transient because they're visiting academics, visiting professors. They wouldn't buy that condo if they could afford it, because they're not here for 10 years. They're not here for 2 years sometimes. They're getting a master's or a law degree, and they have a home. They're going someplace else. I talked to an astounding number of people who are here as an academic fellow for a year or two, and they already have a house and a mortgage. This is the place they're coming to improve their credentials professionally or academically, but then they're going on. And whether we like it or not, that's a huge part of who lives here. We could want them to stay in a condo, but it doesn't suit their lifestyle regardless of product availability or price point.
So what, Michigan's what, 15, 16,000 undergrad and the rest is grad students?
I didn't think it was that. I think it's flipped the other way. I think there's more undergrads than grads.
Way more.
Yeah, way more.
So.
Yeah, I used to think it was all, yeah, go ahead.
So I have one question, then one comment. Jim, you were talking about the 8,300 beds of the used building. Do you know when that build out is through, what year?
They're gonna start the L Bell Field. They're moving L Bell Field over to the parking lot now. And they wanna have it done within 2 years, that phase. And in 2025, they're gonna start the other phase. North Campus is supposed to start now too. But North Campus is a problem, you know, I go to some meetings and said, you have to have something for the kids to do, because they don't want to stay. You go to North Campus, stay years, and you get out of there, because there's no place to go. So they've had me come in and say, take some of these parking lots, ground lease, and put restaurants, put retail, make it so there's something to do.
So they don't take the bus to downtown.
Yeah.
So then the other comment was Broadway Park West just broke ground, and there are 100 condos, and I forget how many hotel rooms, maybe 150 hotel rooms. So I don't know if there's a comment about that.
Well, I should speak to that because what I just said about a very large building, that many condos, I would say that project is an exception for a couple of reasons. One is, it just strikes me, it's always struck me that that project should be like shooting fish in a barrel for condos because the location is so unique. You're gonna overlook an enormous new public space and the dam and the cascades and the pond and all of that. So it seems like a wonderful setting. And then they have an interesting approach where, from what I gather, they have multiple towers. So it's not just that they have to build 100 of them, you know, pre-sell however many to get financing. It appears that they've got a strategy where they can sell them tower by tower, and if things go gangbusters and they can sell them off quickly, they might, but I assume, but if for whatever reason the pace of the absorption is a little slower, I believe they can do it. It will allow them to be able to develop it over time. The other thing it does, I would imagine, and I haven't talked to these people about it, but I think it also opens up more views of the water when they have separate towers and all the buildings aren't facing one direction or the other. So it seemed like a pretty smart move to me.
The problem they're gonna have is the retail. They're gonna build retail there, and retail in pockets like that are a problem. So you can't, the people who live there are the only people to get there. It's just, we're finding pockets of retail. You can look at the one over by El Bell Field that, what's his name, Bill, they can't rent the retail. You know, they gotta really.
Gotta subsidize it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not the quality of a tenant.
It's basically a sundry shop or something minor.
Yeah, they got a little restaurant in that doesn't do well.
Yeah.
Will there be more building in Lower Town?
Well, we have our,
I mean, you have the 3 phases.
right, we have our additional phase. I mean, there are some sites, I think, that are suitable for redevelopment. There aren't a lot. There's not a lot of land there that's
I
available.
mean, I've heard you talk about, the evolution of Lower Town as more residents move in and there's becomes more opportunities for retail, et cetera.
Retail's funny though. It's not, I mean, we do 80% of the retail in town. I mean, I handle everything on campus. I do Westgate, I do Courtyard, and like I said, when you do construction, to pay those bills.
One of the
locals are
things,
hard.
to that point, just thinking about the city, and so another one of your questions was impediments to development.
Yeah.
There has been a tendency, and it's not just in Ann Arbor, for municipalities to just do everything through a planning, like a textbook. And so to say, well, here's a new development, and we've talked about this extensively about retail. And so there was a push, especially from the city, some members of the community. I completely understand it to say, there was a shopping center here, and we long for those days, and we want more retail, and, we're pushed, let's build 20,000 feet of new retail here. And we resisted it, and I believe we were right in doing so, and I believe our leasing activity will prove that out. In the sense that if you do the George, you have a lot of familiarity with that. The George, the community wanted retail because that's what was there. The developer was kind of a goof, and he agreed to it, and it was invisible and hidden and set back and too many square feet and every conceivable thing that could be wrong with it, including circuitous access.
Yeah, but the George, we had it leased. They wouldn't give me money for heating, cooling. There was no money there.
Right, so it doesn't work. And the point is that you end up with the George converting that space to residential, because that's what they can do. In our case, now you mentioned Target being a great addition to State Street, which it is, because you had some grocery. We have Orange Market. We're really excited about it. We've got a great entrepreneur. She runs a plate restaurant across the way. You need to go there if you haven't been there. And that will be an urban market of sorts that she will bring to that area. But because we're not overbuilding the space and we can get reasonable rents there, it can allow more retail to proliferate. It'll be slow, and it's not going to be 50,000 feet aggregate, but the other properties around can see themselves redevelop with some retail if, building upon the success of what we're
I
trying to
think
do.
the idea of having to have retail on the first floor is wrong. I think if you need the retail, fine. If you don't, let it put more apartments in.
Quick question for you. With the abundance of retail, at some point, I think that the supply-demand curve, on the one hand, it's super expensive to build, and so in order to justify the tax rate and the construction cost, you need a national to support the retail. But if there's an overabundance of retail across the board in both buildings, new and old, at some point, do you see owners saying, well, I wanted to get $55 a foot, but I think I'd rather have the lights on, so I'll take 25.
We're finding one goes out, one comes out.
So it's just a
We
killer
have not
job.
run out. We've got a new concept coming in.
Right.
I got the Cane's Chicken, Daddy's Chicken.
Right.
Louis Magoo was just really another chicken place. It's like, they're just constantly coming in.
Okay.
It's just we have one gone, and we bump the rents.
Right.
So it's, but they're all national.
Right.
They're not, which I miss is a Zingerman's, I'm partial anyway, because they're my mall, but it's, you take a look at that, how successful it is. We're losing that local restaurateur.
Right.
And that's what's sad, because we're pricing them out. And I get a guy in there and I talk to him and I go, what is your estimate gross? And I go, well, take 7%. You can't afford the space. You're gonna work for the landlord to give you out of business in 2 years. South U, I tell people, it's fine. Can you make money on 7 months a year? Like it's 5 months a year. Every holiday, it's empty. All summer, it's empty. So, and then we tried to work with the city because we could put offices down there, but I have no parking. So we can't do an office space down there without parking, which would make that, you take a look at State and Liberty. We did all the tech firms in there. And I worked with Google, Microsoft. That created a 12-month-a-year business. And that's why that is where everybody wants to go.
But Main Street is 12 months, and there's a lot of vacant storefronts there, urban jewelers, everything in the Montgomery building, the Peaceful Kingdom, that have been like empty for a long, long time. What?
Peaceful Kingdom is, they're not sure what to do. We're handling the Montgomery building. We've got 2 tenants going in. I remember it went from one owner to another owner, then it went from apartments to hotel apartments. So, we're trying to fit something in there that fits that space. So they don't have to use that space. They want to get the
block
right
is
tenant.
fabulous. You'd think that people would be clamoring to get on that block. Across the street are all these fabulous shops.
Yeah, it's got, 4th Ave has really changed.
Yeah, it's not the
really
Capital
turned around.
Market anymore, it's not the.
Capital Market. I used to be a beer wholesaler, so I know
Oh, yeah.
bar and restaurant.
Well, I remember the peep shows in the 70s.
Oh, the second floor.
Frank Harari owned it.
Yeah, I remember that.
So Steve, Jim and I seem to be monopolizing the conversation.
Yeah.
We gotta get the bills involved.
To Bill and Bill.
Start talking.
Well, Chris mentioned office earlier, and the work from home mandate we're still dealing with, obviously. GM downtown at the Ren Center last fall announced to their employees that they were going to come back 3 days a week. Sounded good on paper. Big pushback from the employees. And GM said, well, sorry, we'll talk about that. But this work ethic, work from home is, as Angela mentioned, is still with us. And that's one of the reasons that we've got so much office space around, and companies that are trying to downsize. And a lot of, pre-COVID, national vacancy rate in office was 12.1%. Today, national office vacancy rate is 18.2%. In Chicago, vacancy rate in office is now 20%. In San Francisco, it's 30%. So it's not us, it's everywhere. And I think that and I think Jim and Bill would agree, the top tier Class A office space is always gonna rent. You're always gonna want that kind of space. And that's gonna open up another tier of space beneath it. And so it emerges as the problem. How do you take advantage of that space? And you've got, there's a ripple effect there because there are landlords that have vacancy rates, they've got mortgage payments to make, so they're distressed. Their lender is at the door asking them what's gonna happen, making a projection for it. And when they don't have the income, then the value of that property falls. And so there's one school of thought that says that repurposing office space and converting it to residential may be an option. In Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot has got a $188 million appropriation to subsidize conversion of old office space into residential units.
Former Mayor Lightfoot, who won that election?
Well, she's still mayor.
She's still mayor.
She's just not reelected, and there's runoff coming. And new buildings don't lend themselves to it. One North Main has got too big a floor plate.
Yeah.
But older buildings that are smaller floor plates and narrower, they're candidates for it.
They're not downtown, they're out Oak Valley, State Street. And those really don't lend themselves.
But that's one of my questions though about why the downtown condo for people to live in doesn't work well, because I think one of the impediments to coming to work every day is the hour commute or the 2-hour commute. And so all of a sudden, if you're on Zoom, you can, avoid all of that. You can sleep for another hour or two every day. But if you increase the number of available, the available housing downtowns, you could buy a condo, then you live 2 blocks from your office. So you can walk there as opposed to drive there. So you take away that commute issue, then it's much more appealing to wander out of your house and walk down the street.
For 700 hours a foot.
Well, so my question was, why, yes, so those condos are too expensive, is what you're saying. So that the house in the suburbs is easier to build and cheaper to build.
I mean, 2,000 square feet, you're $1.5 million.
Here?
I remember, this is about 15 years ago, I was working with some development in Dexter. And at the time, a metric that was pretty commonly trafficked was when you moved from Ann Arbor to the Dexter area, the drop in taxes was the equivalent of 1,000 square feet more in your house when you mortgaged it. And so people were making a calculation of, I love downtown Ann Arbor. And having lived somewhere nearby and thinking about how often I really go out to eat or go to I can have a palace here and drive in on the weekend. And so that choice was made, but in large parts because it's not, the acquisition cost is certainly real, but post-acquisition, you've got other expenses that are different.
So high taxes was another part of the earlier conversation. Right. I guess part of my question is if you go back to the city and say, you've got to reduce your taxes. Are they throwing money away? I mean, I'm not sure that they can cut their budget enough to cut the taxes that much, so.
You can't, you'd be defying state law as well.
Well, yeah.
The tax rate in city of Ann Arbor isn't all that high. Ypsilanti is much higher.
No, but the valuations are.
Valuations, because people are paying more.
So,
And as state law says, you have to have a fair market value.
What I'm hearing is, except for the university, downtown Ann Arbor is doomed. So,
that's kind of where
it's a change,
Is
it's a
that-
change. You're
is
talking
that,
about, Jim says we need
accurate?
more but pardon me?
is that accurate? Downtown is doomed, too expensive, nobody can live here, nobody can work here, nobody can eat here.
What I'm saying is,
I better sell. Jim put my stuff on the market.
You take a look at the retail, I'm talking about restaurants. Restaurants need density. They need lunch. They need 7 days a week. and there's no lunch. I mean, you go downtown, the old town, there's lunch, and that's about it.
But you're also saying new construction for condos is too expensive, so where are the people coming from?
Well, I'm not saying that so much. I'm saying is when you take the office out, you take the density out. So of the people, when you work downtown, you go out to lunch.
Right.
You may meet your wife after work or your husband after work.
So I heard an estimate that downtown is down about 3,000 workers from COVID. I heard this.
Well, you
at-
take the
at
DTE building and that's about 3,000 alone right there.
Yeah.
When you said you need more downtown office space, I don't agree. That's the reason the DTE building is being converted.
I had three floors leased.
That's because.
And they decided to go to
But
apartments.
you know as well as I, the 5,000 square foot footprint right now.
Too big.
Is too big. I mean, I've got 2 floors out of 4 in the Schwaben building that's been vacant for 2 years. Never had a vacancy before, ever, ever. It's a great floor. You've seen it. You've got space listed at.
The Earl building, 3rd floor.
Well, what's the holdup? What's the problem?
People aren't renting because they're still working from home. The floors I have vacant had nothing to do with the rent. We had fair market value. It was fair.
Your rents are below market.
Yeah, they were below market, but people have started moving home, and there's still those service businesses. And we, on the other hand, we have a couple of industrial parks. If I could double them tomorrow, I'd fill them up the next day.
Warehouses, we have none.
Yeah.
Flex space, we have none.
Light industrial space is incredible demand. Somebody moves out, somebody moves right back in. Why? Because you can't run an industrial building, or industrial business out of your spare bedroom.
Sure, right. Yeah.
It's very simple.
Here's an upside on the office vacancy rate. The CEO of Crystal Mountain told me that last year they had their best year ever because people were coming up with their families for the weekends and they were zooming into their place of work and all the kids were out skiing and everybody was having a great time. They were earning great bottles of wine and dinner. Crystal Mountain was just smiling from here to here over the year they had last year.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because I think the work from home is positively impacting the weekend traveler. So what we're seeing is that instead of just Saturday, Sunday business, it's Friday through Monday. People come into town on Friday, people do work from home, they go out for dinner, they go shopping, they stay through Monday, they come in for lunch, they do some stuff to go, they do a little work from home or in the car. And so it's really expanded. The Friday, Mondays has picked up a lot more than the other days of the week, so.
As a small landlord, one anecdotal thing, before the pandemic, we were seeing couples sharing our smaller apartments, our studio apartments even, that had usually been just for a single, to save money, because Ann Arbor was getting more expensive. With the pandemic, and since, we're not seeing that anymore, because the couples are, well, at least one of them's working from home, if not both. So they're asking for bigger places. I don't know if that trend will continue, but at least at the moment, and we're talking people mid-20s to mid-30s, I would say would be our demographic.
I'm curious.
Is this somebody else's turn?
Yes, and I'm curious if we're talking about the health of downtown and wanting to look for ways of filling it up. One kind of obvious thought to me occurred around supporting the digital nomad community and getting them kind of more involved. They would be the type of people that would be much like the Crystal Mountains, right? They have their meetings and then they go out and they want to go do stuff, or they want to work in an interesting place and go to an interesting lunch and then come back. Has the development community or the city talked about supporting or catering to that group at all yet? I haven't heard anything. I'm just curious.
We cater to anybody we can get, right?
Yeah.
Do you mean the conferencing kind of activity, Angela?
Do you know what digital nomads are? Have you heard this term?
No.
Okay, so yeah, so this is a big thing in the tech community. A lot of people that have jobs where they can work remotely, they're opting to essentially pare down their belongings to a very small amount and then go live remotely in different places. So there's a big group of digital nomads. There's a huge subreddit on this if anybody wants to look into it and get to know it more. But there's a big group of people that are taking their tech salaries and going and living in interesting places on the cheap and saving up money in order to have an interesting life in their 20s and then be able to maybe afford a home when they want to come back. There's also kind of a different group of digital nomads that have a home base and then seek to like go to different places for, weeks or months and then be able to come back. So there's different flavors of being a digital nomad, but the concept is that they're looking for places to go and enjoy, and they want like what Ann Arbor has, the interesting downtowns, the ability to be able to, enjoy nature like we do with our river and all of our good parks. And then we have great food. Like to me, I feel like we are very much a place to be capitalizing on that, or maybe even marketing to those groups. But it sounds like that hasn't been really discussed that much from just even the short amount of comments there. But that's
I
basically
think
what
it's a part, I think that is actually a part of the surge in housing demand that we have and that we work with. Although I don't think as a sub-market, it specifically needs something different in the form of product than other people who are renting. But the increase, the surge in interest in renting vis-a-vis condos, I think you could take a chunk of that demand and say it's not visiting students, but it is digital nomads. I've had a number of people who are living that lifestyle who want to stay for a year or two in Ann Arbor, but they plan on being someplace very different a year later because they aren't tethered to an office.
Yeah.
What about shorter term, like short-term rentals and stuff?
It's hard to do here.
Is that where Montgomery is now? It's like I stayed there for 3 days 2 weeks ago because my place was being painted. It's not great.
I mean, I know a number of people who've tried to do that. I mean, you get.
So what's the deal? I mean, that was supposed to be condos, and then it was supposed to be apartments, and I mean, there's no demand for either of those, so they're stuck with short-term rental, or is that just so profitable?
Short-term rentals brings a higher return.
Yeah.
That's why they did it.
Yeah.
I got a little different question. I mean, it's sort of a goal of people like us to try to provide residents downtown for the so-called missing middle. I mean, people who don't make high incomes, don't make low incomes. People like to work in local places. So you know what I mean? I mean, people making 80 to 120,
So
workforce kind of a housing.
Yeah.
And what's the way forward to if that's a policy goal?
Sure. Well, I have a few thoughts on that. First, the city's policy with respect to affordable housing is to fixate it on 60% AMI.
Right.
And I proposed workforce housing. At the time, it just wasn't conceivable. I think you're absolutely right about that. But for all the reasons we're talking about right now, there's not going to be private development of affordable housing downtown. But the city is doing a number of things which are very encouraging, and one of them is that they're deciding they're going to lead the development of some of their own properties downtown, like Catherine Street with Avalon and the Polio lot, and a significant portion of the Y lot property, if that gets going. So that makes all the sense in the world for the city to do it, because they can bring a lower land basis into it. And they can also do things with property taxes, which is the real way that this would get done. So if the city really wants to see affordable housing, I believe that they should do a few things. One, I think they should refrain from the model which has existed forever, which is to put it on the back of residential developers. Simply because, regardless of even if you think it's a good philosophy, it's produced no affordable housing. It has not worked.
Right.
Period.
It's gone.
Yeah, you're not gonna get enough.
And when it happens, I can tell you that with these programs, especially with the 60% AMI in a college town, let's just say there are many ways that college students are getting into this program because they can finagle the criteria, and that is absolutely who this is not intended for. But they meet the rules, everyone understands it, it's the open secret in Ann Arbor, that in some instances, the wrong people, not the intended
You're
people,
looking more for permanent
are
residents.
living in the units. So right now, the city is amidst an effort because they doubled down on the idea that we're going to try to get the development community, especially the residential developers, to provide the affordable. And that really didn't work.
No, it didn't work.
So now they're amidst trying to come up with a way to change the incentives to encourage more affordable housing. But still, the last place you want to build it. And it depends on your perspective. So if you subscribe to the egalitarian view of housing and everyone should share in all housing in all places, then you would very much say we want to see it pop up in these high rises around town. Another point of view would say it is so expensive to build these buildings that when you put the affordable units in, for every one you put in one of these downtown buildings, you could put some multiple of that if you're more judicious in your site selection. And I would just say that my personal belief is if the city really wanted to see affordable housing, they would just forget about this idea of getting it from developers, and they would look at it and say, the way you get something is you incentivize people to build it. And if you created property tax incentives, and they're starting to do some of this with the reclamation of the 2050 Commerce Project, the one over by the post office on Stadium. That was supposed to be an urban style project, which was doomed from minute one, and now another group has come in and they're gonna do an affordable project. They are getting tax relief. That's kind of the way forward, whether you do outright abatements or you do pilots, which are payments in lieu of taxes. And if they really structured those tax incentives in a way to profit always isn't such a good word around Ann Arbor, but if you said, look, we want people to be successful, we want developers to make money doing this, you'd have all kind of people coming forward, everyone would come forward and propose projects and do it because they can make money. And you can structure the incentives, they don't have to be 99 years, it could be a certain number of years of abatement. It could be a certain number of years of gradual increase in taxes, but the trick to the whole thing, and I'm really high level here because the details matter, but the trick is you use TIF. Because with TIF, there's no property tax being collected right now anyway.
Right.
So the taxing bodies give up the future revenue, but they don't have it now.
Right.
But they will get it eventually.
Like Detroit with.
Yeah.
Oh. Because there's also brownfield now is moved over where it doesn't have to be a brownfield site.
Right.
There's money now that you can use as a tip, a brownfield tip.
Functional obsolescence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So
you guys
there's that.
did that.
25 years ago, I worked for the city on that stuff, and we looked at apartment buildings. We could have bought them for $30,000 a door. They weren't nice enough. They didn't have this problem, they didn't have that problem.
Wow.
So now if you want to buy those, they're $200,000.
Oh, yeah.
So it was always an excuse why not to buy them.
Right.
So
So
Don was asking not about affordable housing, at the 60% AMI, but between like 80 and 120% AMI, sort of that missing
The
middle.
same thing applies.
But doesn't the city lack the resources, federal funding and stuff like that are available for 60% AMI?
Well, so my point was, my TIF approach, you can, that makes it up. And then you're not in one of these competitive situations. I'm not an expert on affordable housing and Michigan requirements, but I know it's highly competitive, it's challenging. There are groups that really specialize in it and are very good at it. But you eliminate that barrier and you open it up to a larger group of people that are capable of developing buildings, and they can make money, make real money, developing housing for the income levels that are desired.
I have 3 going on, and right now, the one on Clark and Gulf side, we're on our 11th extension to get to the government.
My God.
11th has been 4
11th
years.
extension for
This is-
what, Jim?
This is a TIF?
Extension in the contract. It's been, we're on our 4th year.
Oh.
Is that for TIF or for some sort of other government?
It's
plan?
Michigan.
Michigan, okay.
So the one they're doing there on federal, they're also, looks like we may do at the old Dodge dealership we're talking about there.
If I may suggest, we only have 10 minutes left. I see there's a hand raised on here, and there are also some people who haven't had a chance to speak, so maybe we should give them the chance first.
Alan?
Oh, thank you. This is a very interesting discussion. Yeah, a couple of things came to my mind. You mentioned the old capital market, and how is it that the economy is such that it cannot really support a food store in the downtown? We have the co-op, we have the Argus Farm, but basically people are enticed to move downtown either as students or as residents, but without the downtown facility for actually living downtown. And so I'm wondering what the economics of that is. And in a similar way, as a small craftsperson, people like myself are priced out of Ann Arbor. There is no place to work. there's no place for my equipment to do my art and craft in this town. And it would seem that somehow in the development of the real estate market, there should be some place that regenerates space for the small craftspeople who otherwise are forced out into non-working or Ypsilanti or so on. So those are on my mind as another dimension of the economics of our land and the building. So thank you. I appreciate hearing.
Okay.
Any thoughts? I can't fix that one. But Target's got groceries.
No, I think it's a similar issue though. I mean, we have things that we desire as a community. Room for arts, room for crafts, room for small, local, authentic business, restaurants or what have you. Residents that are socioeconomically diverse. Those are all things that make a community better, and we want those things when we think about it from a legislative or planning sense. The disconnect, I think Ron touched upon, is that we get there and say we want this, and then we say, let's make them do it. But the people that we say, go do it, like they're answering to mortgage lenders, they're answering to the taxman. The math problem doesn't work. And everywhere else I've looked at, I've studied other markets for other projects. You know, Dublin, Ireland, for instance, a touristically very attractive town, also has a heavy academic base like us, so there are some similarities. Also has a huge housing crunch. The demand drives up the cost of everything. Their government literally competitively buys apartment buildings on the market. They compete against people who would buy them and turn them into, or run them as housing. They buy themselves and then literally rent them out at the price point that they want, and they eat the loss. That's the subsidy. But it's literally just direct intervention. We know that we're not like this isn't. We're not going to just wish it into being. We're going to go buy that thing at market rate because that's the only way to get it. And then we're going to say now we control it and we can set price points. We can make it. We can then say it's workforce space, or we can say this is these spaces are reserved for arts. The art, there are places in Paris, for instance, where they made storefronts under an old aqueduct, and you can only rent them if you're an artist. And it's only available for them.
DDA was talking about doing that on the 4th Ave part of the park.
Which I think
was
a genius. Right, but we actually have to execute on those things.
Cool.
But it's not going to happen without subsidy.
So the Catherine Street project, half of that will be devoted to people in the arts.
Right.
Yes.
At the
That's the
60%.
plan.
Which is
I hope they
excellent.
stay with that because that seems
Oh, yeah.
like an admirable project.
Yeah, it's a great plan.
No, I have another question. This has been a fascinating discussion because it's a whole dimension that I personally am just not aware of. There's this city comprehensive plan redevelopment that's supposed to engage the community coming up, of course. How do we move that to address some of the goals you heard, like the missing middle, workforce housing, trying to bring people downtown to live, work, and spend money? What has to happen in the comprehensive plan to achieve those objectives? Or is it a meaningless exercise?
Yeah, I mean, is it just taxes? Does it matter what we do on the comprehensive plan?
Well, new construction costs, they're very expensive. Taxes are, when a third of your rent is taxes and pass-throughs, that's a lot.
Well, you're talking about putting affordable housing in mid-rise and high-rise buildings. That just doesn't work because of construction costs. We just finished development of the final phase of the co-housing project west of town. It's all 2- and 3-story stick-built construction. That's what Avalon is able to do successfully. Avalon has one going on Platte Road right now. My former company's building that. Just built one in Dexter. They're all 2-story and 3-story buildings. Those are affordable, and because they aren't having to sell those at $600 and $700 a square foot. We're selling them like $300 a square foot.
Wow.
So because of the cost of construction is just radically
cost of
different.
Catherine is $750 a foot.
Which is?
On Catherine,
That's what I'm saying, there's
they released the budget on that. And I
Yeah,
mean,
and it doesn't work.
nobody could afford that.
And that's free land there.
Yeah, that's free land.
Right,
as
that's
well.
free
Yeah,
land.
because construction is just, it's that type of construction, all that goes with that, steel and concrete and fire protection and also, which is all needed.
Oh, good,
But there isn't anything, any
expensive.
padding built in there, it's just, that's how it adds up.
You're talking about like 8 stories kind of, like lower buildings, basically.
The minute you go
Well,
over
I'm talking
4,
about-
it's a different kind of animal.
Yeah.
Because it's the stick
You can't
construction.
use wood, yeah, you need steel, you need extra exit cores, elevators.
Well, what's the scope of Howard Frichet's workforce housing on Washington Street in that project? He's
It's
got a
the top
workforce.
floor, it was studio apartments that are in plan distinct from the floors below, and that's the way the original plan was set out, that it would have the top floor, I think there are 19 units on that top floor.
400 square feet, 375.
Yeah, they're really
Yeah.
small, but he was able to break, like, take the other units and divide them in half essentially on the top floor of the building, so that, and the housing authority has to be responsible for screening renters. Now, that's what it was before the pandemic. Does
You
that
think it's
sound
on,
familiar?
you think it's on top, well, I'm on the downtown review board, when he came to that, the 19-story building, at that point, the original proposal wasn't gonna have the affordable housing. Affordable housing was in that separate
No,
building.
the separate building is workforce housing.
Yes.
That's where, it was a smaller building, maybe it would economize because of the cost of construction
It's like
being
6
lower
stories or
for a
something.
4, 5, 6-story building.
Right.
And the reason that building is separate is because by separating it from the 19-story building, it's not in the historic, it is in the historic district, which means it comes under review by the Historic District Commission, which would be an easier process than if it were joined to the 19-story building, because if they were literally connected as one building, then the Historic District Commission would be reviewing it, and that would have become a very cumbersome process for
So
him.
you're saying the 6-story building is in the historic, because we
Yes.
reviewed the other one.
You
the
probably review
DRB.
them both.
No, we certainly did the DRB, but we don't do both.
Okay,
HDC, we
the
don't do
shorter
anything in
building
historic
is
district.
in the Historic District Commission, and
Yeah.
they separated that so that they wouldn't complicate the review process. And it's supposed to be workforce housing, smaller units too, but also that type of construction, the way it's finished. And the other building, the compromise was that they would put those so-called affordable housing, which the housing authority has to manage, on the top floor, and they would be very small, 400 square feet, but it was
The minimum
meeting that.
350 square feet or something like that.
Yeah, that
But
was.
it's like everything else subsidizes that. It was to meet those 20
Yes,
requirements
yes,
that
but
Rob
everything,
pointed out.
but the efficiency was
Those
they could take a whole floor and
Those
do it.
requirements just don't work anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've now taken an hour and a half of you guys' time, I think I promised you an hour.
You owe me lunch.
We owe you lunch. That's a bargain.
Yeah, but all the restaurants are closed, so.
Zingerman's is open.
We'll go to Zingerman's.
But thank you all for taking.
And we don't have a formal way of wrapping it up other than to say thanks a lot, see you next month.
Thank you.
Come again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, neighbor. See you at the building.
Yeah, where do they?
Look for our white test.
Sort
I don't know what we're gonna do this for. When you use the one. Yes, and there's a reason why I don't know. We don't have a solution.